Hey, welcome back to another Patreon lesson. Today's topic is going to be slightly less fun, but it's definitely an important part of modern music if you're going to be doing drum tracking or producing or editing or anything like that for people. I mean, a lot of times in modern music, drums are gridded or are gridded um, to a certain, preference, maybe like slightly behind the beat or ahead of the beat, but a lot of times drums are manipulated timing wise, after the fact. So I thought this would be an important one to do, and I'd had a couple people asking me how I go about it. There's a lot of different ways to do it based off different DAWs, not necessarily the idea of manual pocketing, which I'll talk about both, but I thought since I'd had a couple people asking, and I'd kind of been putting this off for a while just because editing in Logic can be pretty clunky, and even though I have a system, even that system can be clunky at times because of Logic's just slight mysterious ways. So you'll have to hang in there with me. Hopefully, this will run pretty smoothly because I definitely have a system. It's just even Logic can present its own weird little quirks every so often that something will not work the same as it always has just because, and I need to like restart or something like that. Um, but anyway, so I thought what I would do is kind of quickly tackle just how to manually pocket like a hit. Just because I realized when I was going to do this video that maybe not everybody is in Logic, and so the way I'm going to show after the idea of manually pocketing is how to like sort of mimic Beat Detective in Pro Tools and Logic. And I was like, well, I don't want to post a video that, if somebody's not in Logic, it has kind of no use to them. So I did want to show just how to, the basic understanding of how to just pocket a hit manually, just because you could do that in any DAW. And for some reason, a couple years ago, I couldn't fully wrap my mind around how to do that, like how to manually pocket a hit. It's just there's a lot of questions I had that I felt like online like resources or videos didn't really answer, or they didn't answer in a way that I could understand. And so it's pretty simple, but it's something that for some reason in my mind didn't click, and maybe there's some of you out there like that. And so hopefully I'll be able to kind of communicate these ideas in a clear and simple way, or as simple as I can. So what I did was I just grabbed some drums that I recorded for something that haven't been touched in terms of editing, because I think these drums are actually going to stay unedited in terms of any pocketing, because that was kind of the goal, is kind of just a more like not as tight of a feel for the song that they're for. They have been processed just with some plugins because I grabbed them out of another session. Um, but I thought I'd just take a small section of that drum pass and just kind of show you these techniques. It's a little less overwhelming than seeing like a full song's worth. And it'll be a little more quick and efficient way of explaining it just with a smaller section of the take, just because it's the same concept throughout. You don't really need a whole song's worth of drums to show how to do this stuff. So these were just basically taken out of that. So they're faded in. There wasn't really a good point in the song to like where the drums came out and then came back in. So I just kind of faded them in a spot that was I thought would be simple to explain. So not that it really matters, but I guess the first thing I'll do is just show you what they sound like. Like I said, these were definitely played in a way that, I mean, they're on the click, and they were tracked with a click, of course, but they, I wasn't trying to play super robotic or anything. It was just kind of supposed to be a little loose. So I'll just quickly show you what those sound like. So that's the example I'm going to be using, and once again, not really doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm going to talk about, but just to mention, this was the first time a friend, I've got my studio room here where I always record, but I've got a kind of a big open living room, kitchen area out in the other part of the house, and a buddy the other day was like, "Have you ever thought about trying just to see what it sounds like out here?" And so it got me wanting to try it, and I had a song that I could try it on. So these drums are actually recorded out with the drums like literally in the center of the kitchen, and then the room mics are way across the house in the living room. So that's why they're quite a bit more like reflective sounding than most of my stuff that I do in here. So anyways, I thought these would be a good example to show just because they hadn't been touched. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just explain the concept and give a little demonstration of how to pocket a hit manually. And like I said, this would kind of be the same way you would do it in any DAW. I guess a good question to answer that somebody might ask would be like, well, why would I want to manually pocket something when I could, use an automated system or something? For me in Logic, the time I would want to manually pocket is if I don't want each hit to be exactly on the grid. I actually had somebody, I think, ask this when they mentioned me doing this video, is that, how do you decide how much to put stuff on the grid and how much stuff to kind of leave more natural? So there's kind of two answers to that question. The first is one reason that I would pocket manually is because unlike Beat Detective, which I believe has an ability to pocket, but you can kind of set the threshold of like how on the grid it is, like a percentage or something. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think there's actually a feature where you can make it not perfectly on the grid, but just close. Logic, the way that I mimic Beat Detective in Logic, it's more just exactly on the grid in the way that it works. And so if I need something that's a little more flexible, that I'm going to have to go through and manually just place the transients where I want, just because there's not a feature that I know of in Logic that I could do it all at once, like in an automated way, but also have that control over it not being perfectly on the grid. So that's for me just a Logic thing. And then two, somebody, with that question was kind of saying like how, like like a pop song or something, how do you decide how, like what elements feel really gridded and what feels more natural or has the feel of the real drummer? And I guess my kind of simple answer for that is typically in that instance, I'm wanting to lock the kick and snare like perfectly on the grid, but then I'm not trying to pocket like the hi-hat or sometimes I'll purposely leave the fills, the tom fills or whatever unedited so that there's some, the things you really want to feel like really consistently or consistent, but then, the subdivision that the feel that the person has on the hi-hat is still there in between where you've pocketed the kick and snare, or like when they hit a fill, it feels more like their own, natural fill. So, yeah, that hopefully that kind of answers that question. I think that's kind of one of the cool things about editing, even though it's kind of not fun, is that you can take something like a performance and really take like the kick and snare and really make them really tight, but then you still are going to get the feel of their like hi-hat hand or their hand on the ride or whatever, which is kind of really where like a big part of a drummer's feel comes from anyways, because that's like the timekeeper, and that's like there's more variance in how people like play the hi-hat, for example, where the kick and snare, yeah, you could play a little ahead or a little back or whatever, and obviously kick and snare is like the most important thing for most songs, but the way somebody plays a hi-hat, whether they're like slightly swinging something or just their, I don't know, just their accent or however they play something like that is gonna like, I think, enforce their unique feel, as in FEEL, more than like where they place the kick and snare, which is typically gonna, hopefully be kind of right on the beat or maybe slightly behind. So hopefully that answers the question of why you'd want to manually pocket, especially in Logic, or like how you determine, it's all up to you. That's just my preference, is like, if I want to keep the feel of the drummer but pocket it, then just pocket kick and snare and leave everything else kind of the way it is. And obviously when you slide around kick and snare, it's going to be sliding around those hi-hat hits in between, but naturally those are going to kind of follow the kick and snare in a way that feels natural because they were playing it that way. So, all right. So let's jump in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And what I'll do for this section is just maybe show like one or two examples, maybe one on the kick and one on the snare, just because this concept is like, once you learn it, it's the same thing for every hit. So you'd go through the whole song and do it the same for every like kick, snare, and then if you wanted to pocket the toms, if you wanted everything to be really locked, then you would do the same thing for the toms. So there's no use in me showing you, me doing the same thing 10 times in a row. So you've got your tracks here. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention too before jumping in is I think somebody also asked, does it matter if you pocket or grid drums before or after processing? On a technical level, I can't answer that, but I would say I think as long as all your processing is happening on plugins in the DAW, and you haven't, like, say, sent out the snare track through another compressor and smashed it and came back in, then you should be good. Because obviously, if you were smashing a snare or whatever, and you really affected the transient pretty heavily, and then printed it back in, and then we're trying to pocket that, I think it would still be doable because you're probably not going to kill the transient so hard that your DAW is not going to be able to read where it starts. But in this case, even if I'm slamming something with a compressor, as a plugin, the transient is still the way it was recorded. So my DAW is still going to see the transient as it was recorded, not so much, I don't think, what it would look like after being printed with that effect. Pretty sure that's the case. I haven't had any problems pocketing after doing plug-in processing. I typically probably will often pocket before I get to sounds. Just, I don't know, it makes more sense in the process to me. But in this case, I have already added some processing to these, so these are going to be processed sounds that I'm pocketing. Okay, I think that's all the kind of things I wanted to mention beforehand. So yeah, I think that's it. I know this was probably a heck of a video to watch through. I'm sorry I'm not the best at explaining these super technical editing things. That's why I've kind of avoided this one for a while, but I figured it was time. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you're not beating your head against the wall at this point. If there's anything that I missed or that you need further explanation on, let me know. I think I covered everything. I know a lot of it was just I don't know why this is the case. It just is. I know that's probably annoying, but yeah, Logic is not ideal. But those are the ways that I've found to use it. And I've maybe at some point I'll get Pro Tools so I can just use Beat Detective and save even more time. But for now, I'm sticking with Logic. The process works, and usually I can do it pretty quick without having to explain it. So, but yeah, if you've got any questions on that, let me know. Pocketing is something that's not very fun, but it also is like a creative decision. So it's important, and I know some people will even offer their, pocketing services to other people as just like a little side income or something. It's not something I do because I definitely like to avoid it unless I have to do it, but I do have to do it quite often. So I thought I would show you guys how I do that, and I think that's all I've got. I'll see you next time.